very feeling very escalated, right, for the individual. So the horn is too loud, right? They jump all the time. They're confused. Oh, my child hates writing. They can't do their laces, right? Lemon, oh my goodness, right? Lemon has a sharp taste. Anything yellow, I'm not going to eat anything yellow. All of these things are things that we hear parents say about their kiddos or their kiddos say about themselves. And we try to convince them. We try to behavior modify them and say, oh, it's not loud, which doesn't work because it is loud. It's still loud. So what do we do, right? What do we do with that? Well, what we do is we have to be a detective for our kiddo. And if you're autistic, you have to be your own detective, right? When you get older, because you have to know how your sensory system processes information in order for you to know what supports you need. Just like I need to know which reading glasses, and I don't know if you all can see, but I just took off my reading glasses. I need to know which prescription is best for me to see so that I can buy the right glasses. I bought a 2.0. If I buy a 1.0, I can't see. So I need to know my eyes and how they process visual information so that I can support my vision and participate. It's the same for sensory. It's the same. If you don't know how your child processes sensory information, how do you know what supports to provide? They know they're going to jump, they're going to leave, they may be able to communicate. And even if they can communicate, they may not be able to articulate what they need. So we have to know, or at least follow their lead and allow them the access. If they need to swing, they need to swing. All right. So the reason all of these things are happening is because as an autistic individual, they may feel bombarded by information. They will seek out that intense sensory experience, like jumping and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, where we get dizzy and we're like, how are they not falling over? It's because their vestibular system is not getting enough information. So they are spinning to get that information so that they can participate, communicate, socialize, and respond and complete a task. If you have a sensory system that's not regulated, you have to attend to that, right? You have to attend to that. So if you go to a conference, workshop, doctor's office, and you did not bring a long sleeve throw jacket, what are you going to do? You're going to sit there regulating, moving your arms, moving your body, trying to warm yourself because your sensory system is dysregulated. So while you're doing that, you can't really hear everything that the presenter is giving. You're not even sure what the doctor's receptionist is saying or if you even heard your name because you're so busy attending to your sensory system. But our children are put in situations where they have to attend to their sensory system when their supports are not in place, and then they get in trouble for not doing what someone is expecting them to do. But it's not fair because they need support for their sensory system. And I understand resilience, we don't all get to, life is hard enough. We have enough trauma in our day-to-day in terms of things happen. We don't need to create more, right? So children are going to have resilience based on life. We don't need to put them in sensory situations that are uncomfortable to build resilience. That just builds trauma and leads to mental health issues when they're adults. So back to the concept of the sensory experience is different. It's bombarded. They seek out intense. All of these things are misunderstood often and listed as an inappropriate behavior, right? Oh, my child is jumping on the bed. They love to jump on the bed. They need to jump on the bed. So if you don't want them to jump on the bed, it's not about getting them, reinforcing them when they're not jumping on the bed. It's not about reprimanding them for them to get off of the bed. It's about knowing the reason they need to jump on the bed. They need to regulate their proprioceptive system. So get them something to jump on if you don't want them to jump on the bed. It's really that simple. Oops. All right. So a little bit about what does self-regulation look like. And I put this early in the presentation because I often see goals for self-regulation, and I want my child to self-regulate, and the teacher wants them to self-regulate, and all of these IEP goals, but everything they're doing to self-regulate, they're trying to stop. Flapping their hands is self-regulation, but people want them to stop. But then you want them to self-regulate. It doesn't work that way. So we need to know what self-regulation looks like. And typically it looks like moving their body, right? All right, so this is the first video. We're going to see how the transition goes for it to play. I'm not sure if you all can see the screen. I think that you can, and I'm going to click play. Let me know if there is a problem. All right.
It looks and sounds okay to me. Does it seem okay to you guys?
It should be the whole screen.
It is.
Okay, perfect. All right. So because the wording is a little blurry, I am going to read this and then I will talk about it for a little bit, and hopefully I can still read it. All right. It says, I hope one day we can live in a more inclusive world where autistic people don't have to be afraid to STEM. I recently drove over 6 hours to see my family. About halfway there, I was overstimulated and coming close to a meltdown. I stopped to eat food, and afterwards I realized that I needed him. I was nervous about people staring, but my body needed to release my stress and regulate. So I got out of my car and openly stemmed. I tried to ignore the reaction of people around me. I checked around for my safety, but overall focused on myself. I decided that my mental health was more important than the emotional health. It was a very freeing moment. So what I want everyone to take away from this is, number one, this is an autistic individual that is driving, living independently 6 hours from her parents. So typically, if someone saw someone doing this STEM in public or in a classroom, they would think, oh, they can't do anything independently. But they can. The stimming is not an indication that someone can't. So we have an autistic adult who lives independently, drives independently. She drove 6 hours. That's a break. Everybody takes breaks. I need to regulate with movement. So that's what she did. And she has every right to do that without feeling unsafe, without being accused of having mental health issues. She's just moving her body in a way that works. And if you watch the video, you can see how she starts to get sort of a more calm, organized look, right? In the beginning, very, very frazzled. And then you start to see no one's telling her anything. No one's talking to her. She is self-regulating with things that work for her. This is what we need to have in regards to inclusive environments. This is what we need to accept so that autistic individuals can participate in inclusive settings. You can't participate if everyone is not supporting you, right? You just can't. It's really, really difficult. All right, now I'm going to try to go back to the slide. Which I'm not sure. All right, let's see. All right, I think we're in the slide. Let me know if it does not go forward. Look at that. It's like magic. All right. So thinking in terms, and please pop your questions in the chat. Pop your questions in the chat. When we think of those senses, right, that we learned in school, these are the 5 senses that we learned. This is it. This is what they told us our senses were. And we said, okay, well, now we know more, right? There are 8 sensory systems. The usual smell, auditory, vision, tactile, taste, but we have that vestibular sensory system, that proprioceptive sensory system, and the all most important interoceptive, which is the one that really organizes all the information from the other 7 senses. I mean, it's just amazing how it all works. We take it for granted, right? Because we walk around, we just make adjustments, we do things. But for an autistic individual, these 8 sensory systems are working very hard to navigate an environment that was not designed for them. And I say this all the time. My autistic student, my autistic friend is not broken. They are managing, navigating, trying to communicate and socialize in environments that are just simply not designed for them. So it's a struggle, right? But with supports, it's amazing how it can be helpful. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this vestibular and interoceptive and proprioceptive, those 3 that our teachers did not teach us about. So the vestibular system, when I talked about the kiddo that spins, right? The vestibular system, and you're going to have handouts that will be sent to everyone. So like everything will be sort of neatly packed for you to be able to have at your, or to access. The vestibular system is the system, it's kind of like your internal GPS, right? It kind of tells you, like right now, I'm very internally vestibular regulated, right? I don't need something behind me to hold my core up, right? I'm sitting up straight. I'm getting all of the information that I need to organize, interpret, and respond from my vestibular system. For someone who's not getting all of the information they need for their vestibular system to integrate, organize, and respond appropriately, with air quotes, is the movement, right? You've seen autistic individuals who rock, right? Rocking back and forth. That is a way to get vestibular input while you are talking, communicating, or sitting in class, because the classroom's overwhelming. So I need to regulate my system so that I can actually feel balanced, because your GPS system, your vestibular system, helps you feel oriented, right? It doesn't make you feel like you're going to topple over. But when it's not working efficiently because it's either not getting enough information or it's getting too much information, then you're going to see some things, right? Running, spinning, going to the slide over and over and over and not letting other kids get a turn. Not. It's about they need, right? Everything, the drive is I need this input. If we look at the proprioceptive, which works very closely, or should I say is partnered with that vestibular system, your proprioceptive system is the one that tells you where your body is in relation to space. So that's why they're jumping, moving out of their seat, all bouncing all over. They don't know where their body is in relation to space. So if I crash into things, if I crash into hug someone, guess what? My little yoga, not yoga swing, like the pocket, right? Keeps them really close, like a sensory sock. Then guess what? I'm getting all of that deep pressure that tells me exactly where my body is in relation to space. And when I know where my body is, right? If you don't know, if you're not getting the information to your interoceptive system that tells you this is a full bladder, you need to hold it and then eliminate when you get to the toilet, the message is not getting there. Guess what? Potty training is going to be a little tough. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Be a little tough, right? And I will share a story. I like to share stories. I remember in my early years of trying to understand autism, and it never made sense to me why my autistic students were struggling with potty training because there's no intellectual delay associated with autism. Um, so why is potty training so difficult? Well, now we know it's because of the interoceptive. Your body signals are not getting the message. Your brain is not organizing the message and making the connection. It's not broken. It's just overloaded, right? Overloaded. I mean, there's a picture, and I should have put that picture in the slide, but I'll see if I can send it with the resources. But Kieran Rose has a photo where it's an autistic person standing, and there's like all of these like lines of sensory input, way more input is being taken in. Like there are things that autistic kiddos see, smell, feel, sense that we would never imagine. And I only know this because I ask my students because I feel like I'm missing out when I see them focusing on something, and I need to know why, because they seem so joyful and happy about it. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about these sensory systems in practical sense, but I wanted to just introduce them to you, and you will have the resources as well to read more about it. And this is just kind of a little bit of insight into, sometimes you will hear a sensory system is under responsive or over responsive. And I should have put the video, but the under responsive and over responsive is really a matter of, if you have someone that covers their ears because they feel like it's too loud, or if too many people are talking, it's too much to process, then that is an over responsive auditory system, right? It's responding because it's overloaded, right? It's too much. And then if you have a kiddo that walks around with a fractured ankle that's swollen and they don't seem to be bothered, that is an under-responsive interoceptive tactile system. And that happens often. Kids will hurt themselves, get up, and never sense that they had any injury. That's an under-responsive system. And you can have under-responsive, over-responsive mixes within the 8 sensory systems. And it changes over time as our children develop. All right. So let's talk a little bit about sensory craving and sensory seeking, because we hear this word all the time, right? My kid is sensory seeking. My kid is sensory seeking. What does that mean? Well, these are kids that are actively seeking or craving sensory stimulation and seem to have an almost insatiable desire for input by jumping on the trampoline for hours, by spinning for hours, tapping a pencil on the table for hours, because they need the input. Why do they need the input? Because it helps them to regulate. Why do they need to be regulated? Because that's the only way to attend, communicate, respond. You have to be regulated. These kiddos are also the kiddos that tend to be constantly moving, crashing, bumping, or jumping, right? And then everybody says, oh, they're ADHD. Well, number one, they're kids. And I think that in today's society, because no one plays outside anymore, it seems annoying that children are moving, crashing, bumping, or jumping. But I remember as a kid, we all moved, crashed, bumped, and jumped at recess in the neighborhood, on the street, when we played outside for hours. And nobody cared because we weren't annoying anyone, because we were not inside. And outside is so important for all kids, but definitely for that sensory seeking calmness. A lot of our kiddos just prefer to be outside. It's so much more calming and organizing than inside. I have a kiddo that did a really good explanation. If we have time, I'll show it at the end, of how he felt being outside compared to how he felt being inside. And it was very insightful. So the moving, crashing, bumping, jumping is not, woo, it's ADHD. It's children are supposed to move their bodies. If you are an autistic child and you need input, you're going to move your body maybe more than you see other kids move their body, but it's okay. Give them a place to move, give them a place to crash, give them something to bump into, and give them something to jump on. That is how we support the needs of autistic kiddos. Just like we support with glasses, we support with providing what they need for their sensory system. These kids may need to touch everything, be overly affectionate, not understand their space and other space. So I put this in because I think it's important to understand that it's not about understanding space, personal space, respecting space. It's not about that. It's about they need that information in order to regulate. I'm not saying they should be able to touch the face and the arm of every stranger or rub on their mom's arm all day long to regulate. I'm saying we don't need to work on a goal of understanding personal space when it's not about personal space. It's about seeking, craving input to regulate. So the solution is not teaching about personal space. The solution is how do we provide them with the touch, tactile input they need so they don't need to invade personal space. Yeah, it's that simple. It's really that simple. All right. I won't go into this, but I did want to bring this up because I think it's important for those of you who already have an occupational therapist, for those of you who do not and are going to run out and get an occupational therapist to do a sensory profile for your kiddo. These are also components of the sensory system in terms of motor disorders, dyspraxia, handwriting, all of that, sitting up, lounging, kids who are working on their core, right? All of those things are because of the sensory system. And I say this because it is so crucial to understand your child's sensory system. So crucial. You know, when I hear things like, oh, you know, we were doing a sticker chart, a token economy, and we were getting them to not jump on the bed and it was going really well. And then they started back again. They regressed. They didn't regress. They still needed that sensory input. But instead of providing it, it was targeted or approached with strategies for behavior when it was they just need it. It's like your diet, right? If you need to have more iron and you're craving meat, eat meat because you need it, right? I mean, it's really that simple. I know I'm saying it's simple because it really is that simple. But I did want to just touch on that so you can know to ask about those things in terms of handwriting, core, holding up, kids who W sit, kids who are always leaning back in their chair. All of that is related. It is not non-compliance, not following directions. I don't like to sit. It is, I cannot. And if I am not regulated, I won't be able to do it. Therefore, I need to stim. Stimming, and more stimming. This word is a word that is all over social media. Everyone's talking about stimming. And a long time ago, it was stop the flapping, stop all that stimming. Well, some people are not doing that anymore, and they're allowing kids to self-regulate, which is what stimming can be. Stimming has a lot of different purposes, but what's happening is now schools specifically or therapy settings are allowing kids to stim, and then they have to stop. You can only stim for 5 minutes, but what if they need to regulate for 15? So when they say, well, we gave them 5 minutes of stimming and it still didn't work, they still weren't able to be on task. So stimming, allowing them to stim doesn't work. In charge of how long they need to stim. And I teach I teach virtually autistic students, and all of my students stim to regulate. All of my students stim with objects, with movements while they are in a lesson, and they are all learning while they're stimming and moving, because when they're regulated, they're able to take in information and respond. So they move. It's really that simple. We just have to give them access. The value in stimming and how it facilitates and sensory regulation is so important for everyone every non-autistic individual to understand. And I will share a story in reference to a teen autistic girl in Puerto Rico who I would volunteer with this organization, and she was always there. And she loved to talk about boys, and she loved to talk about drumming. However, in order for her to have a conversation that was a back and forth flow and she could communicate verbally without any struggles, she needed to stim. So she would, and I don't know if you guys can see, but she would wave her hands back and forth and she would rock, and then she would talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. No one ever made her stop. And guess what? It was wonderful. She was fun. Like I got to know her because I allowed her to be who she was. I allowed her, her family allowed her. The community did not make any deal out of her stimming to self-regulate so she could have a conversation. And this is where we need to get to. We need to accept that it's okay for people to move and do things differently. It's okay. All right. So, parent tip, stimming has a purpose, and we should not tell our kids to stop. Very few stims are harmful. Very few stims. If something's harmful, yes, of course, your common sense, don't. But most stims are not harmful. They're just annoying to other people. And the other people, I don't want to say they don't matter, but if someone takes away my glasses and I have to sit in a class, that is a problem for me, right? And so I'm going to be frustrated and I may be disruptive, or I may keep talking, or I may just walk out because I can't participate without my glasses. So my perspective should be valued, even though they want everyone in the class to not use glasses. Think about it, right? These are things that we allow for every other disability, adjustment, and difference. But for some reason, autistic individuals, because it's an invisible disability, it is that neurodiversity we can't see. We can't see inside the sensory system. So we think they should be able to do it like non-autistic individuals. But they're autistic. That's who they are. All right, so I'm going to let an autistic person give you a little insight, and then we're going to have some questions. All right, let's hope this works.
What does autistic stimming look like?
So this is Nell, and let me turn this up. She is just an amazing, beautiful autistic human being inside and out. And she takes time to share insight and to help us learn and understand because she doesn't want any other autistic child, teen, adult to go through what she went through, which was constantly being told to stop stimming, which has led to mental health issues, right? And we don't want that. We don't want that. So let's listen to what she has to say.
What does autistic stimming look like? Stimming is about re-regulating after overload, stress, or maybe just feelings of joy. It's about tapping into the seven senses. Stimming can look like this, like that. You might be seeing a trend here.
All right, just a little insight. And then I think we have questions. All right, so I cannot see the chat. We're going to take just a quick, I don't want to say quick break, but we'll take a little time if there are any questions that anyone has. I'm just looking through.
I have a room participant with a question. I'm going to bring her the microphone so that you can hear her.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. The way that you related exactly the sensory senses and how it relates to the real world and how people who are not on the spectrum is a great job. But my question is for redirection. I have a son. He's a flopper. And I understand too that, he's also 4 years old, he wants to get his way, but it's always been a challenge for us when we go out in public and to want to do things. I want to take him to the grocery store. I want to take him to do activities. Um, if he needs to regulate, his thing is to drop. And
Mhm.
how do you redirect that? Or his thing too can be sometimes the head banging too as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm. All right, that is an excellent question. Thank you so much for asking that. So this is what I will say. It's not so much about redirection, because remember, the sensory system is going to seek what it needs. And when your son is either dropping or banging his head, he is communicating, I am dysregulated and I need help. So, the number one thing that I tell to parents when I do parent coaching is when you have a child with a disability, autistic, cerebral palsy, hearing impairment, whatever, right? You have to make a few adjustments. And that means sometimes we have to do things differently, or we don't go all of the places we used to go, or we shift out, or we prepare, right? Remember when you didn't have any kids and you just got up and left? Remember when you had an infant and you had to bring all the stuff? It's like, I'm just going to stay home, right? So it's thinking in terms of when your kiddo needs support, you have to proactively think about what supports are needed, and then you don't have to worry about head banging and dropping. I am all about proactive parenting. So, knowing your child's sensory system is key. And if you don't have an occupational therapist, I highly recommend that you get either the early intervention team or an occupational therapist to do a sensory profile, because that will tell you how your kiddo's sensory system works and what would work best for him, right? It could be maybe the bright lights, the fluorescent lights in the grocery store are just too much for his system. And so he may need something to block all that out, right? It may be an iPad with headphones so that he can hyper focus on that and not have to be overwhelmed by the grocery store. I think the difficult part for those of us who are not autistic is recognizing, realizing, and wrapping our head around the fact that grocery stores are extremely overwhelming for autistic kids. There's lights, smells, people, carts. There's so much going on that their system is having to process. It's like their system, think of it as a website. Taylor Swift tickets, right? Everybody goes to the website and it crashes. That's what he's doing when he flops. His sensory system is done. So the proactive part is, one, when you find out what his sensory system needs, you provide that before you go to the grocery store. So for example, one of my moms, she provides lots of outdoor movement for her kiddo so that he can be as regulated as possible before they go out to run errands. And then she's got a sensory backpack with everything that he needs, his favorite sensory snacks. She has whatever sensory items that she's going to have him hold or manipulate while they're in the store or just running errands sometimes in the car. The frustrating part, and I do understand the frustration of parenting an autistic individual, is recognizing that I have to do things differently. I just have to do things differently. And it's okay. It's not like their whole life you can't go to the grocery store. You just do it differently, just like when you had babies, right? Like we have babies. Oh my gosh, you guys remember when you had to bring all that stuff? It's like overwhelming. So it's not that overwhelming with sensory, but giving as much proactive sensory input to regulate before you go to the grocery store is very helpful. But for little ones, because their neurological system is so immature and it's an onslaught of information, for some little kids, I'm like, just don't bring them. Like shift out. I never forget, a mom posted in one of our groups, in our New Orleans groups, and she said, how do I get my autistic kid to go to the parade for Mardi Gras? I'm like, you don't. They stay home. So you shift out. It's too much. It's just too much. Like it is so much for some autistic individuals. It is painful. So that's where banging the head to get regulated comes into play. It is painful, some of the sensory input. It's exhausting. So understanding how difficult it is, not to feel sorry for an autistic individual, but to think about, okay, these are environments that are overwhelming for my child. Why is it overwhelming for my child? Let me get something that tells me why, which is a sensory profile, and then I can put a plan of action and I won't have any more issues. It's really that simple. It's work, but it's really that simple. I hope that answers your question.
She nodded her head yes, in case you couldn't see her very well.
Okay.
And you do have a chat question. I'm
Yes,
going to read it out loud just for my in-room participants to hear.
yes.
It says, do you have any tips about helping a child with interoception, specifically who doesn't have an easy time knowing when they are hungry or thirsty or need to use the bathroom?
Yes, 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 yes. So I am actually going to go into that a little bit more deep in some slides to follow. So that will give you a little bit more information, but it is all about visual schedules, knowing their interoception, because there are kids, and that's another thing that's hard. It's like, I have a mom and she has 3 autistic kids. Mom is autistic and 2 of her kids are never hungry, never feel hunger. They're interoceptive, never. There are autistic adults that have apps that have reminders to drink water because they never feel the sensation of thirst. Now, when I say they never, I want to put a clause in there. The adults today didn't have access to the sensory information we have now. We now know better. We can now do better. So if we now know, we have programs that can help the interoception organize and process information a little bit more efficiently. And that's really what it is. It's about knowing how they process the glasses. How do they see? What prescription do they need? Same with the sensory system. And in regards to suggestions, because this is another great question, for the caregiver that gets sensory overload, and I love this question. I have to help families all the time because I have a lot of families where one of the parents is autistic, which most of the time that is the case. And some parents don't know which one is the autistic one, and sometimes they do. But my autistic parent who has their own sensory needs, that has an autistic child, 1 or 2, I do sensory profiles for all of the family members. And then I have like a little slide chart. Not a slide chart, a quadrant chart, and then a slide so that everybody knows everybody's sensory system. And then we put things in place like this is the spinning area. This is the area you can make the noise. These are where the noise canceling headphones are in. And it's finding the balance. And I have a mom that every now and then she hides in the closet because she's overwhelmed, and everybody survives. Right? You got to do sometimes what you got to do. So it's knowing the sensory system is how you can proactively put things in place at home and in the community and at school to avoid some of the meltdowns. Meltdowns sometimes occur. I mean, every now and then I want to have a meltdown, and I'm not autistic. I do. I think I just do it quietly or when I get home. However, it is sometimes unavoidable because we don't have control over everything in the environment. But if we do know and we do have a plan, then that minimizes the onslaught, because it really is described as an onslaught. All right. Do you think it's helpful? Yes, 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 and yes.
Wait,
And I did not
Stacy,
finish the
sorry, the
question.
people in the
Sorry.
room need to hear the whole question.
Yes,
And then
I
after
know.
this question, we have one of our room participants has a question. The question says, do you think it's helpful to redo a sensory profile when approaching the 13-year age? Things are changing and what has worked is not always.
Yes. And it's so funny, Claire. Thank you for saying that. So I have this habit, those who know me, where I talk and I don't finish my sentences because I have 3 ticker tapes at all times. So I pull phrases. So thank you for reading that question. And my answer is yes, yes, and yes. Children's sensory system changes. I always have parents get updated sensory profiles at age 6. It's important. If you got one when they were a toddler, when they start school, they should get one. Age 8 is a really good time. 10 or 11 before they turn into puberty. When they're in puberty, you need to figure out what's going on because it changes for sure. Yes.
I'm going to bring the microphone over to our in-room participant. Apologies if you haven't been here before, but I'm gonna have to hold it really close to your face because that's the only way it works.
Hi, my name is Antoinette. My biggest problem is I want to know like advice with the sensory issues with a child that is completely nonverbal. I hear that you give a lot of information in the videos, and I think it's great when they can talk and you can talk back. But with my son, he's 11, he's completely nonverbal. He's struggling using the AAC device. So we're like still in the infancy stages in a way. So where can I go from there? Obviously, I know he has the STEM. I mean, he's 11. We've been dealing with this a while, but it's the communication delay
Mhm.
that we have problems with helping him because he can't communicate to us what he's really feeling.
Yes, yes. That's a great question in terms of how do we find out what our non-speaking kiddos need? And what I will tell you is the same way we find out with our kids who do speak and have communication. The sensory profile is based on questions that parents, teachers respond to based on things that you know your child does. For example, if a parent tells me, oh my gosh, they just jump all over the house, I'm like, oh, sounds like their proprioceptive system needs a little bit of input, right? So getting a sensory profile will help you know what your son needs. And your son knows what he needs because he's going to seek it out, right? I mean, you know, he's going to stim, he's going to move, he's going to do what he needs to do. The non-verbal component, and I do, I apologize to all parents everywhere for not having speech therapists put AAC devices in a toddler's hand because toddlers can navigate AAC devices, and we're waiting way too long. Louisiana doesn't have enough specialized speech therapists to really implement our AAC devices because we have access to so many great things. The other part that I will suggest is asking the speech therapist who decided on the AAC device if they need to reevaluate to see if maybe that application/device is not the best one for him. Because if a child's not really responding well with a device, then it's like, is this the right one? And I'm not saying I don't know, but those are things that you can explore, but you definitely can know what he needs sensory-wise by getting a sensory profile. I mean, I do them for 2-year-olds and they're not talking at all. And once we know what they need, we put things in place, and then those irritating behaviors disappear. I say irritating behaviors because it's usually things that are just misunderstood, right? Like, why is my child climbing? Oh my gosh, they're climbing on everything. They're climbing to fill the cup. Their vestibular system is not full. So they're going to climb to seek because they do not know how to orient. They can't orient. And that's what blind people do. Stevie Wonder does it all the time. He moves his head to orient, right? But we stop autistic kids from doing that. He's doing that because he's not getting information. Stevie Wonder does not have eyes to get information. So he has to orient using his vestibular system, as all blind people do. So thinking in terms of you can find out, you just need a sensory profile, and then you can implement everything that your kiddo needs. And I wish you the best on the AAC. Keep at it because it is a game changer when communication comes into play. Non-speaking individuals go to college, get married, and do all of that, just like everybody else. They just need a way to communicate. And I'm not saying that college is everything because I think it's kind of not everything. All right, any more questions?
Looks like everyone's slowed down for now, so I think you can
Right.
move on to the next phase of your presentation.
All right, and we have an hour left, perfect. All right, so every time I look at this slide, what does sensory regulation really look like, right? I put this slide because a lot of time parents will say, at what age will my child be regulated? When is my child going to be regulated? How long will they be regulated if they jump off on the trampoline for 45 minutes? Well, looking at this, it's very confusing, very like deep sleep, arousal, like what? Like, what does that mean? That's exactly what it looks like in your sensory system. It's regulated, not regulated, regulated, not regulated. You can feel happy one moment and then something happened and then you're really frustrated, and then you can feel really joyous. Emotions change all the time. That's why we should not be asking children how they feel every 30, 20 minutes, because it's an odd question to ask. All right, and it changes. So the maintained sensory regulation, because this is what parents always want. Like, I want my child to have maintained sensory regulation because it allows children to maintain that appropriate level of alertness in order to respond appropriately across environments to the sensory stimuli presented. Well, this maintained sensory regulation, it changes within the hour, within the day, it's constant. You can have 6 weeks of no meltdowns, regulation, and then bam, the moon and the stars, dysregulation, right? It happens. So thinking in terms of the important part or our role as adults in maintaining sensory regulation is giving access to their sensory needs, giving access to movement. And one of the things that I will say is parents understand that their children need to move. And usually at home, they can move, right? Or they bring them to the park or the trampoline, or they bring them swimming. Children are required to sit way too much in classrooms, way too much. So a lot of times parents are getting that delayed effect of dysregulation, and it's exhausting for you because your child's exhausted from sitting in class all day. Sitting. They make kids sit more than they make adults sit in the workplace. It's so much sitting. And there's silent lunch. They're taking away recess. I mean, kids are not able to regulate at all. So it's important that we advocate for our kiddos in the schools, that they have access to sensory activities. And that's not, we don't have a sensory room, we can't do it, or they can't go to the sensory room anytime. You don't need to go to a sensory room to regulate. There are 100 million things to do, at least 100, maybe not a million, but 100 you can do in a classroom to maintain sensory regulation and give access to other, so that other students are not disrupted. And also, I will say, usually the other kids in the classroom don't care that Bobby spins. It's the adults that have a problem with it. The children don't care why Bobby spins. The children who don't wear glasses don't ask to wear glasses. They don't need them. The children who don't need a fidget don't want a fidget. So the adults are the ones that say, it's not fair, it's going to bother the other kids. Well, a meltdown bothers everybody, including the autistic individual. So if we provide the sensory input for them to regulate, then they can participate in the classroom, right? And sometimes they may just have to leave. Sometimes it's just too much. And the world keeps spinning if they leave. The world still spins if they step out of the classroom and miss instruction. It's amazing. The world keeps spinning. All right, instruction can be made up. Like, seriously, I'm an educator, but instruction can be made up. Children need to be healthy and nurtured in their learning environment. And if their sensory needs are not met, it doesn't matter what instruction they have, if they can't participate as an adult in society. And that's what I want for the next generation of autistic individuals. I want them to be able to have access to their sensory needs. And so this individual is an autistic individual who happens to be an occupational therapist. And I loved this post that she had, so I wanted to share it. And she talks about, as an autistic individual who is a therapist that works with many neurodivergent kiddos, she says, you know, when you're trying not to misread everything during a conversation, right? And so she says, I love working with families, and it can take a lot to work to pick up on social cues from clients and coworkers. And I want to pick apart that statement because I often see or hear autistic people don't read social cues. Well, in their defense, the reason they can't read social cues is because non-autistic people change them all the time. They're not forthright. They're not just direct, right? It's, if you've ever seen that show, The Good Doctor, I love the scene where the neighbor comes to borrow batteries. And of course we all say, can I borrow some batteries? Can I borrow a tissue? Are we going to give the tissue back? No. Are we giving the batteries back? No. So we're confused It's not that they don't understand social cues. We just give the wrong messages or we read between the lines. Just tell me the line, right? That's the perspective of an autistic individual. So as a person who is autistic and a therapist, these are some of the things that she talks about, she deals with, right? What are the vibes? Are we tired, upset, frustrated, or just want to vent? I am interpreting and asking reflective questions and playing detective all day until I get to know my families. And don't get me started on a group conversation. I am just trying to keep up and process it all. Don't ask me any thoughts unless you want to hear it randomly at the end. Anyways, I wanted to share because there are a lot of things that click for me with neurodivergent clients, but also some areas of my job where I've been smiling and nodding and asking a billion questions, right? Because I need more clarification. The reason I wanted to share this is because I want parents to know just because your child is autistic, just because autistic individuals have challenges, if they have supports in place, they can. She is an occupational therapist working as a professional, right? She's living her life as an autistic individual because supports are in place. She's still autistic. She still has to weed through social cues and conversation, but that doesn't mean her life is difficult every single minute, right? So I say that because I think a lot of times parents feel that if my child doesn't learn to pick up on social cues, they're never going to be able to do anything in life. It's not true. It's simply not true. And picking up on social cues, reading communication, and all of that requires sensory regulation. It's so important. All right, let's get to the good nitty-gritty potty stuff. This is not a training on potty, not a webinar on potty training, but the sensory potty connection, I think, is just important for us to talk about because some of you may have kids that are still working on potty training. And, there's the noise, the flush of the toilet, right? There's the curiosity. Instead of using it, I'm just going to look through and see what the water does because I like watching the patterns. This picture of the grass on the toilet, I'm going to share a story about that picture. This picture came out of one of my clients in Australia. Her son was potty trained, right? Potty training is, when you have to go, you eliminate and hold at your own demand, right? It's not about going in the toilet. That's not what potty training is. We didn't have toilets back in the day and people were still potty trained. Potty training is about holding and eliminating at your own, right? Like your own control. So her kiddo was potty trained. He just was pooping outside in the grass because he would go take off his shoes, stand in the grass, rub his feet in the grass, squat, and poop. And his mom's like, what the heck are we going to do about that? And I said, well, let's think about it. It seems like the grass is what's helping him to get the poop out. He knows he has to poop. He knows in enough time to take off his shoes and go outside. He knows enough time to do all that and squat. So check, he's potty trained. We just got to get him to go in the toilet. So this is what mom did. She had a stool because we tried all the strategies. She brought fake grass, put it on the step, and guess what? He immediately went to the grass, rubbed his bare feet in it, and sat on the toilet and pooped and has never pooped outside again. It's really that simple. Because we knew what he was seeking and he needed it, we just provided it in the area where he needed it. And that's it. Now, fast forward, because some people say, oh my gosh, well, you can't walk around with grass in your feet. No, you can't. But guess what? He poops at home. He doesn't poop anywhere else. He has a poop schedule. And now, this is an old picture. It's from 3 years ago. He has a bathroom mat. He doesn't have grass. He has one of those bathroom mats with the little tendrils, and he just puts his feet on that, and that's how he goes to the bathroom. It's really that simple. You just have to know and do the detective work. All right. So most parents, and I will go a little bit quickly because I know this is not about potty training, but I do think it is important. So for most kiddos, right, that developmental age, the pottying, the schools put pressure on you, all these things about potty training are going to drive you crazy if you don't understand your child's sensory system. I have parents that will say, we've been working on potty training for 2 years. Why? Why? Potty training doesn't take that long, but getting their sensory system regulated and understanding their interoceptive and knowing if they understand their body signals is important. So that's the work that needs to be done before we get to potty training. And guess what? Once we know their sensory needs, once we understand that they need to work on body signals to know what a full bladder feels like, what is that pressure on my bottom telling me, then the potty training falls into place. It really does. It really does. But we've got to understand how they are processing their bladder. Is it full? And making them go every 10 minutes never gives them a full bladder. So they never learn that sensation, which is why I don't like potty training routines or programs that are like, bring your child to the toilet every 10, 15 minutes. Now they never get a full bladder. They never learn the sensation of what a full bladder feels like. And that causes issues. So the sensory system is critical to potty training. If a child literally cannot feel sensations from their bowel and their bladder, or the sensory receptors of this interoceptive sense are not picking up or interpreting messages properly, the child will not know if, when they have to go to the bathroom, or how to control their bowel bladder muscles for elimination. And you do not have to have communication to be potty trained. You do not have to have communication. You just have to have access to the toilet. If the toilet's there, you know you have to go, you go. You don't usually ask permission at home. I'm not saying we can't work on communication. I'm saying don't wait for communication to learn about their interoceptive sensory system to address the challenges of potty training. That is what I'm saying. If they're not getting signals, potty training is going to be really difficult. And you should not be stressed working on something for a year or two. That means whatever you're doing is not working. It's not working. Take the sensory approach. And there are other issues that can get in the way as well. So after your child is showing all the signs below, right? That's when you go into your potty training, right? They can get to the bathroom, sit on the toilet, they can pull their pants down, all those things, right? Some of them you maybe kind of wing it, but these are things that you want to look for. And you will get a copy of this slide. So the other things that kind of get in the way of potty training in regards to sensory processing is kids feel distressed over a dirty, wet diaper, right? And so they just keep taking it off, right? They never really get to the point of recognizing because they're so stressed over feeling dirty. Sitting on the toilet. If you don't have your core posture and stability, your vestibular system is not working properly, you're going to feel like you might fall in that hole. So you're not going to go there. Not going to go there. Unable to pull their pants down can sometimes get in the way. So sometimes we have to change pants. For boys, one of the things that I recommend is get a big t-shirt, let them go around with nothing on, and there's no pants to get in the way. That's at home. I'm not talking about go to the grocery store with a shirt and no bottoms. Some kids, their sensory system can't take the smells of the bathroom. For some individuals, the bright light, sometimes we just have to change the light or put a night light in the bathroom and they can go without bright fluorescent lights. Sometimes we have to adjust the toilet seat. Sometimes it's just uncomfortable pushing poop out. Sometimes, especially if you're constipated. You've seen what comes out of kids when they are constipated. I mean, my gosh, you're just like, how do they even push that out, right? Imagine that's how they have to go all the time. So you just avoid it, right? Another reason, it's kind of gross, but another reason kids struggle with potty training is because they actually get lots of sensory sensation from a wet diaper because it's warm and then it's cold and alerting. Or I know it's disgusting, but I remember a little boy said to me, I like to poop in my pants and then go against the wall and smush it because it feels so good on my bottom. That's the sensory input. Yeah, it sounds disgusting, but if you really think about it technically, from a kid's perspective, who needs sensory input, it's pretty good, right? So the sensory connection, all the visuals, those things lead to potty success. All right. I wanted to do questions, but let me go into the next part and then I'll bring back the questions. Because I wanted to go into a little bit of the sensory social communication connection, because a lot of times people think of sensory processing difficulties, but they don't realize how it relates to communication and to socializing, right? Social engagement. So I will sort of try to set the scenario in a way that a little kid told me. And I asked him, why are you always standing along the wall and not joining in when the kids play the game that I know that you like? And he said in his in his best way, because he was not as efficient verbally, and he simply said, too much loud movement. So knowing sensory, I said, okay, it's too much movement. It's too loud. And then I watched the game and then I'm realizing kids are moving sporadically, right? That's a lot of sensory input. It's a lot. Like if you're non-autistic, you don't understand how people moving is visually overwhelming for some, right? How more than two people talking at the dinner table. It's like, oh my gosh, it's overwhelmed. I can't sit at the table and eat. I can't sit here. It's too much to process, right? Some people can even hear other people eating. So that's not fun to sit at the table with. So they get up, they melt down, they cry, they don't sit at the table because it is excruciatingly uncomfortable to the point of sometimes painful, like painful. Nothing is more irritating to me than a therapist, a teacher, a parent, a paraprofessional, whomever, running a vacuum cleaner in a room with a child who gets overwhelmed with the sound because they need to learn to tolerate it. That is literally projecting neurological pain onto that child. That is why they're screaming and trying to get out of there. It is a real sensation. And I think that that's why we need to talk about the sensory system and how it relates to autism, because these are things that cause so many issues, right? School environment that we think are behaviors that need to be redirected. And it's really their sensory system just is overwhelmed. And you can't make it not be overwhelmed, but you can support it, right? And when you think of social communication requires attending, taking in sensory information from others, body language, auditory, visual, all those things. It's too much. It's too much, right? It's too much. So they stay on the outskirts. They don't go to circle time. It's too much. Little Mary has a ponytail that swings back and forth, and her mom uses this strong strawberry shampoo. It's too much. So I'm not going to sit next to Mary, or I'm going to pull Mary's hair because it's too much. I don't know how to communicate and articulate. I feel sensory overwhelmed, even if you can talk verbally. They don't have the maturity to be able to communicate that. So they communicate it in ways like running out, standing back, pulling Mary's hair. All right, we have another autistic perspective. I appreciate that you share that, because I want parents to know it is work to communicate. It is work to socially engage, and it doesn't come natural, and it's not always exciting and joyful, right? I have a couple of other friends that just happen to be autistic, and they're very good at telling me, okay, I'm done now, I have to go, bye. I don't want to hear your side of the story. I'm like, okay, wait a minute.
I was like that when I was younger. I was one of those people.
And I can appreciate the honesty, right? Like maybe they don't really want to hear my side of the story, but we have to take turns. Like I listened to your story, now it's my turn to tell my story. And of course, these are friends of mine, so we have a really good relationship and rapport, and so I don't take it personally at all. But I do appreciate
and I'm sorry to cut you off. And we have
and I do apologize. You had to listen to me talk, but I wanted you to see how Torin, who is an autistic individual, my podcast co-host, how he's communicating.
to learn that. For example, right now, to communicate in like a conversation, I've been accused of not being autistic because I can hold a conversation back and forth like we are. But how I do that is I have to kind of plan out what I'm going to say a couple of seconds in advance and try to predict what direction you're going to go with the conversation. And as a result, you'll say something and then I'll start trailing off. You're like, I could say that. And I'm like, I have focus. And I could say that. Oh, I have focus. And that's something I've just learned over time.
Yeah.
And those are like a bunch of little tricks to make sure that I'm listening to everybody and make sure that I'm respecting what they have to say, just like they're respecting what I have to say. And it's not out of malice. If your child does that, understand, if your child doesn't listen to you or laughs when he shouldn't, it's not out of malice. It's our brains just wired different.
That's it. And sometimes a laugh is not necessarily laughing at another child. It's just they don't have another way to respond.
Exactly.
They can't find the word. So the takeaway from that video is it is hard work for autistic individuals to participate in communication, social engagement, and back and forth conversation, right? It's hard work. Torin is an adult. You hear all that he has to do just to have a conversation. And we're expecting children to do all of that and be aware of all of that. It takes time. So we have to support their sensory needs so they can learn the best ways for them to communicate and give them access to alternative ways to communicate. And that is how we can get to know and get the very best from our little autistic individual kiddos. I remember when I heard him say that, and I was just like, wow, that's a lot. And now that I am living in another country, learning a different language, I can relate in terms of that's what I have to do when I go out into the community to communicate. I have to think, okay, I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to ask for this. Let me practice what I would say in Spanish, and let me practice and predict what they might ask me so that I'm ready to answer, because I may not be able to find my words and I might forget the word, and I don't want to have to use my translator because I really need to practice my Spanish. So all of that work for me to go out, right? But that's just me choosing and having the option to do that or not. But for an autistic person, that's the way they have to function. And I'm not saying this to make you feel sorry for autistic individuals. I'm saying this so that you understand it is hard work. And we need to give grace, we need to provide support, and we need to find out what they need to regulate their sensory system. Because if we just keep expecting them to do things the way we want them to, the way we do things, that's why we're going to have meltdowns. And we don't want that, right? It's not productive. Sensory dysregulation impacts attention to what others are communicating. Often you'll hear people say, oh, they're just in their own world. No, they're attending to their sensory system, or they're in a monotropic state of hyperfocus, one or the other. But it's not about necessarily ignoring other people. It's attending to what's important to them at that time. And it's usually related to sensory or communication, right? So thinking in terms of maintaining a conversation and how many sensory distractions there can be. People's faces, sounds, things in the background. It's a lot. Social engagement, playgrounds, classrooms, siblings, other children are sensory overload. They just are. They are sensory overload for most of us. If you walk into a daycare or kindergarten class, it's insane, all of those 5-year-olds. Imagine an autistic individual who has a system that's taking in way too much information. And we're expecting them to participate, communicate, socially engage. They can't. It's too much. So we need to know what they need, and we need to provide the supports. Right? All of those things, initiating requests. Well, they never ask for it. Well, they can't ask for trampoline if they're dysregulated, and they can't communicate because they're dysregulated. Children there's no benefit to not communicating. There's no benefit to holding back communication. If they can do it efficiently with words, they would. On the days they can, they do. There are days that Torin, who you just heard, does not have access to his words. We may have a podcast to record with a guest. We have to communicate differently on those days. Because sometimes he's dysregulated from running errands. He lives in New York, can be a little chaotic, and he doesn't have access to his words. AAC devices can become a stimming tool, but that is also related to possible Gestalt language processing. So keep that in mind in terms of when someone says, oh, they're not using the device appropriately, they keep stimming on it. That may not be a bad thing for that child. All right, how can you help? Well, get a sensory profile, know what your child needs, and you can make changes in the environment. Remember, autistic individuals are only struggling when they're in environments that are not set up to support their needs. My students don't struggle. I have everything they need to support their needs. So they're able to do everything that we need to get done. Their supports are in place. Sensory regulation before social events, right? And don't go to birthday parties if your kid doesn't like birthday parties. Birthday parties are for children. I think we've forgotten that. I saw a really funny Instagram. I know this is a side story, but it popped in my head. There's an Instagram and it reminded me of New Orleans and parties when I was a kid, where it's a kid party, but it turns into an adult party and the kids are sent to the room. And we're like, wait a minute, this was our party. Yeah. So children's parties are for children. If your child cannot take all of that sensory overload, then don't bring them, or only bring them to part of the party that they can handle. It's okay. The world keeps spinning. And I always say, when your kid doesn't get invited to the birthday parties, guess what? You're saving a lot of money. Do you know how much money little popular Becky's mom spends on birthday parties every weekend? All right. Sensory activities incorporated into therapy. Please, 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 after this, if you have not done so before, ask your child's therapist and your child's teacher, how are you incorporating sensory regulating activities into their day? How are you incorporating sensory activities into their therapy session? What are you doing to make sure that they're regulated so that they can participate in school, therapy, whatever it is that they're doing? And give children a little time to process. I know it feels like you're waiting, but give them time. Use your visual supports. Give them time to process. You'd be amazed at how they can respond. You just got to give them a little time. Sometimes I have to count to 8 in my head to give one of my students time. And guess what? When I do that, I get the most amazing responses. But if I kept interrupting him, saying, give me the answer. Do you need help? Give me the answer. I interrupt his processing. I need to give him time because I know how his system works. I'm able to know that he needs time. So digging into that sensory profile is so important. Incorporate sensory activities into the child's daily routine. If you have an OT you're working with, if you have a parent coach you're working with, if you have speech or someone who is doing a fantastic job helping you to understand your kiddo, then ask them what activities you can incorporate into their daily routine. So I will give an example. I have a kiddo that is 3 years old and he needs a lot of proprioceptive input, like a lot of proprioceptive input to regulate. So when he gets up in the morning to go to the bathroom, he wants to jump on the bed. Well, mom's got to go to work. She's got to get him dressed and he needs to go to the bathroom. So there's no time to jump on the bed. So we came up with a way for him to get the proprioceptive input he needed so that he could participate in his bathroom routine. And what we did was mom put little stickers of, I think he liked Bluey, some character, let's just say it was dinosaurs. And she put a trail of stickers on the floor from his room to the bathroom. And so he gets out of bed and he jumps onto the first sticker and he jumps and jumps and jumps and jumps until he gets to the bathroom. Because every time he's jumping, he's getting sensory input into his proprioceptive joints. He's getting input to tell him where his body is in relation to space. So by the time he gets to the bathroom, he's regulated enough to get through his bathroom routines. There are ways. It may look different, but it's okay. All right. So I wanted to leave at least the last 15 minutes for questions. This is my final video. And I love this video. I love this video so much because I think it is one of the best videos that gives us insight into a non-speaking autistic individual. and understanding and seeing how they are competent and intelligent and aware. And just because it looks different doesn't mean that they're not a valuable, capable, whole human being. So let's see if my video works. All right, I'm going to purposefully make sure it starts from the beginning and that the volume is up. And let's see. Why does the volume go down?
This is Chris stimming. Stimming is self-stimulating movements or noises that are usually repetitive or unusual. We wanted to learn more about these stims, how they feel for Chris, and why he does them. So, we asked him some questions. Chris doesn't use words to communicate. He communicates using this board. We asked Chris, "Why do you stim?" Chris communicated, "I stim because I need to regulate my disordered sensory system." We asked, "Why do you like to have your hands over your ears?" Chris communicated, "It reduces environmental overload and sound becomes a lot softer." When appearing very sensitive with hands over ears, we asked if he could describe what it felt like. Chris communicated, "Sensory system needs my attention." This took a long time to spell as Chris was a bit reluctant to take his hand away from ear. After Chris finished bouncing up and down across the room and suddenly switching to very still moments, we said, "It looks like you're in a great mood." Chris communicated, "Yeah? Feeling really?" Chris then tippled over a table and ran out of the room laughing. He came back and communicated, "Happy, but on edge." We asked Chris, "What do you want people to know about you when you're having a day like this, where you need to jump around and then be still and so on?" Chris communicated, "Sensory system controls all movements. When I'm like this, it's hard to do anything useful. Seeing the struggles is crazy. I can only imagine how I look." Chris then added at the end, "We're autistic. Not weird."
All right. I absolutely appreciate Chris sharing his insight with us. I cannot tell Chris enough how much I appreciate him sharing his insight, because people think someone like Chris, watching someone like Chris move, seeing that Chris is a non-speaking individual, people think they don't know, they are less than, they don't have the vocabulary. Oh my gosh, he doesn't possibly know what's going on. He's very well aware, just as your children are. They have something to say. They just need a way to say it. And they can only do that, as Chris said, if I'm regulated, if I'm on edge, protecting my sensory system, I can't communicate as efficiently, and it may take me a little bit longer to spell, right? So I want to say thank you so much before we go into questions. I really appreciate you coming to learn about the sensory system and how it impacts autism. And I will, I think, close my screen and then answer questions. Is that okay, Claire?
Yep. Did you want me to have Eric come over and answer that question you gave him
would
at the
love
beginning?
that. Yes, that's one of the reasons I wanted to get my PowerPoint off. All right, so I showed videos of some of the autistic individuals in the community, but we have a local. And so Eric and I chatted a little bit about some insight he could give, because I believe autistic folks are the ones that know the most, right? So when Eric's ready, Eric, do you want me to rephrase the question so the listeners all know?
Yes.
All right. So I asked Eric if he would share a sensory experience that people misunderstand. And it's probably I'm not sure. Anyway, I've asked him to explain that. And I also asked if Eric could share any strategy that he uses as an adult to support his sensory system.
Sometimes loud noises bother me. I typically try to isolate myself away from them. I have noise canceling headphones, although I rarely use them.
Do you, oh, sorry.
They just feel weird. I don't know why. Something about the way it cups around the ears.
And Eric, I think that's insightful for parents because sometimes children have trouble wearing the noise canceling headphones that have been recommended. And sometimes we have to find the right headphones or find another way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So Eric, what is a sensory strategy that you use or a sensory regulating activity you use often?
I try and just isolate myself away if it's getting too overwhelming and I can't.
Just to clarify, she's asking you, like, what's a proactive thing you do to support your sensory system? Not necessarily in response to something aversive, but just in your day-to-day life, sensory strategies you use to support yourself.
I don't really know. I think I've stop pushing the microphone in my face.
Closer to your face.
Siblings. I love it. Eric, do you want me to reframe it?
No, Claire rephrased it well.
Okay. I think that I have one more question, Eric. Can I ask?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't think I answered the previous one, but
It's
sure.
okay. It's okay. It's okay. So what I would like to know, Eric, is I'm always curious, what is something you can recall from your childhood that was sensory overwhelming, but nobody understood why it was overwhelming? Do you remember? Or does Claire remember?
Claire, I think, remembers better than I.
I mean, I think you can answer the question though. You can try. Give it.
It's already prepped up.
Well, but yeah, but you're in your body.
Well, maybe you could jog my memory.
Remember how you used to hate Target?
I actually don't remember how I used to hate Target.
Target's overwhelming.
It was probably just, it was bright. It had a very weird smell.
You know what, Eric? I love that you brought up smell because I live here in Mexico and I'm not autistic, but I have an olfactory system that is very over responsive and I smell everything. So there are two grocery stores that have items that I like, but I can't go in them because I can't take the smell of their cleaning supplies that they use on the floor. Yep. So I get it. I get it. Thank you, Eric, for sharing.
You're welcome.
All right, let me check the chat. It's not pointed at nothing. It's pointed at the people in the room so that Stacy can see them. It's not pointed at nothing.
Eric doesn't want to be a star today. It's Taylor Swift's weekend.
Hi, I have another question. So we're getting ready for my son to enter kindergarten, and one of our goals, he's 4, one of our goals is kindergarten ready. Well, as we have gone through this journey, we're knowing that that's going to look a little different from what kindergarten really looks like. One thing that I do know about my son is that he does learn from his peers and from social play. But I also know that he also has to maintain being regulated so that he's not pulling on kids. He'll get a little bossy. What are some sensory activities, I guess, that can be implemented into maybe a social setting in school that you see that kind of works for both keeping the child regulated and also allowing that social interaction with his peers?
Yes. All right. So I love questions. All right. So this is what I will say. And Claire knows me. I'm going to put out this clause as an educator, as someone who loves education, but I will say there is no such thing as kindergarten ready. The schools are bamboozling parents and saying you have to be ready. Kindergarten is the first year you go to school and you learn how to be in school when you go to kindergarten. We don't prep for kindergarten to get to kindergarten, but the world has changed and I'm pushing back on it because kids now have to come to kindergarten reading and knowing everything. I'm like, well, then what the hell are we going to kindergarten for? I don't understand. All right. So that's my 2 cents on that. And that's only because I don't want you to stress. I don't want parents. I feel like schools have parents so stressed over potty training and readiness and reading. It's like, oh my gosh, no wonder everybody's overwhelmed. So kindergarten, I'm going to tell you what I did with my students for socialization, for the kids that love to be in the group. I handpicked the children that I thought would be the least amount of sensory overload. Now, usually kids gravitate to the kids. Like they go to kindergarten, autistic kids are like, all right, I'm gonna check this out. Let me look on the outskirts and see who's sensory safe. All right, okay, little Bobby over there looks like he might not be too overwhelming. So I'm gonna hang with little Bobby and oh, Sarah looks like. So that's what they typically do. So if I see them gravitating to a kiddo, then that's the kiddo that I'll incorporate. I work with the non-autistic child as well as the autistic child. And I'm going to say this as bluntly and politely as I can. It is not the responsibility of autistic individuals to make adjustments for non-autistic people to be comfortable. It is the responsibility of all of us to find some way to meet in the middle so that we can have relationships, socially engage, whatever it is. Autistic children should not have to do it for the convenience of the non-autistic children. And non-autistic children need to learn and understand how autistic children communicate, why Bobby needs to spin, why Bobby needs to be in control of the game, and whatever else needs to happen with Bobby. So I tell parents all the time, you need to go in and go to your school, offer to read a book, talk about autism. We are not going to get inclusive settings if we don't talk about autism. We can't just not talk about it. It's not a secret. Oh, confidentiality. Everybody knows Bobby's spinning, right? Why is Bobby spinning? Bobby's spinning because he's autistic and he needs sensory input. So I think it is very important for parents to go in and talk about it. They do that with every other disability. When wheelchairs started rolling in, everybody talked about wheelchairs and read a book. Books about Down syndrome. There are books about autism that can be read to autistic children, and you would be amazed how the children are receptive much more than the adults. And now I have to share a story. I went to Guatemala and did some volunteer work with a children's center because there were a couple of kids that were diagnosed autistic and a bunch of kids who were not talking. Didn't know what to expect. It was very rural. But what I did see was several children in that children's center who could not communicate verbally for whatever reason. 2 children that were autistic and needed to line up their toys and put things where they needed to be. Do you know that because no adults intervened, the children played, adults were over here talking, children are playing, running, no one's saying, watch out, Bobby, you're gonna fall. All of those children accommodated naturally for the non-speaking kiddo. Nobody touched the autistic kiddos. He went like this over his toys. The kids respected it and moved on, didn't touch it. The child who was deaf, everybody incorporated her into a game. Inclusion is natural for children until adults intervene. So I say that to say we have got to go into classrooms as parents, talk about autism, make the environment more nurturing for your child by talking to the other children. I'm not against the adults. That's not what I'm saying. But adults are hard to shift, hard to shift. The children are going to be their peers they grow up with. The children in the class are going to be the people that they work with when they're adults. That's who we need to educate. So I don't know if I answered your question, but if you'd like to know more, you can track me down. I don't want it to be the burden of the
That's the
autistic
same
child.
thought
Yeah.
process that I'm in, and I'm finding as I'm learning about the school system, how it works. And, I may be the parent that's kind of on the spectrum yourself. So I'm already thinking in my head, okay, how I'm going to combat this, how I'm going when they say this, or what is an example I can give them to do. But you're absolutely right. there's not necessarily an example because all kids are different. So the only thing is to educate about inclusion. And you're absolutely right. It is the adults. Because my son, when he goes, to different things and they have childcare, they're ready. And I just let them know those kids, they gravitate toward him. They learn sincere. They'll figure it out. But like you said, it's the adults that try to put all the red tape, the regulation, and all this. So I'm glad to hear that.
And in
We-
terms of books, I actually do have, I didn't get to check out as many of them from the library as I wanted to, but I can send out a list in the follow-up email this week of good children's books that have positive autistic representation, that you guys can either suggest to the schools or just bring in or whatever you can get from the library system. If you want to check them out yourself before you buy them. Not all of them though.
The other recommendation I have, Claire, on that is, as an educator in the classroom, why can't we move for all kids? Do you guys, I mean, I'm older, I'm thinking than most of you because my kids are grown. But remember we played Heads Up, Seven Up. That was a teacher saying, these children are rowdy, let me do something, let them move around, right? We played all those things. The kids, the teachers had us handing out papers. They knew we needed to move. So I always tell teachers, it's not about, because I hate when people say things like, well, it's not fair that they get, oh my gosh, stop with the fairness, right? It's not fair that somebody has a hearing impairment and they have to wear hearing aids. So why can't they get accommodations? Like, it's ludicrous to say that. But it can be something that all the kids can enjoy. All the children love jumping. All the children like running. Let's go outside and run. And I am one of those people that I am really hard about not taking away recess. That silent recess, inside recess crap is ridiculous. We've already taken away recess. We've taken away PE. Children need to move their bodies. And I say to teachers, if you need your children to have some kind of consequence for whatever happened that you feel is so important, you can still do recess, just do structured. So I used to do, all right, we're going to do a relay race, multiplication facts. Let's go. So I am giving them opportunities to move outside, but I am in charge of the structure because of whatever. I don't really do recess takeaway because I want my recess and they can have their recess. Like, recess is important. I know. I love when you ask kids, how was school today? What'd you do at school today? Recess. That's all they remember. All right. I'm going to calm down so I don't go on a tangent. I just want our kids to be supported. That's all I want. And understanding their sensory needs is so important.
You
So
bring up,
important.
just want to piggyback off of that. It's something that could be beneficial for all children. Bringing in, and making accommodations can be beneficial to all children. And it's just so difficult on why our adult educators cannot see that. A trampoline in the room cannot just benefit one sincere, it can benefit someone else who may need it. So why are we not willing to make these adjustments, which start asking some real questions? So what is our purpose here?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yep.
All right, we have about 5 minutes left, which is probably time for like half a question since Stacy, you always have a lot to say.
I do.
Does anyone have like a specific question that they want to ask?
And I will say that, someone may have a question later. I'm pretty easy to find on social media. I love answering questions. I mean, if somebody would pay me to just sit in a booth and answer questions all day, I'd probably be really happy. Well, not all day because I want to teach my students as well. But I want parents to know. I really want parents to know. Like, I really want parents to know because I feel like parents are their children's expert, and I just, in my parent coaching, help them understand the why, right? You know that your child prefers to work next to the window. Why? Well, let me tell you why, so that you can know what to ask for when they're going into the classroom.
Stacy, could you share your social media handle? I had a question about it.
Yes. All right. On Facebook, you can just find Stacy Badon, and you'll see a big autism, like you can't miss it. And on Instagram, I think it's at Everything Autism.
And we can confirm after the fact, and I can send those in the follow-up email as well.
Yes.
Oh, it looks like
Okay.
somebody already found you.
What I do want to ask is if anyone has anything specific they need as a resource that I can add to I'm going to put in the Google Drive that Claire has resources to email to everyone. If you have anything specific you need, please either message me or you can let me know now, and I'm happy to add that. I mean, I have things in my head, but there may be something specific that somebody needs.
He can't hear you.
So, for me, I would like you to put information more about the potty training. As I said before, my son, he's 11, he's nonverbal, and honestly, he still wears pull-ups because it's like a hit and miss with him with potty training. But I had never heard the concept of the, what you say it was
Interoception.
interoceptive. So now that I'm hearing that, I'm definitely want to go do more research about it because I feel like that could help. And my son doesn't have a sensory profile.
Yeah.
That wasn't something that was ever really taught to me. I was taught like, oh, we have to figure out what the stemming is and so he can do something else. But
Yeah.
now I'm learning like shit, let him stem. Like
Yep.
I don't
That's
really
it.
care at this point.
I love it. That's going to be my quote for the weekend. Shit, just let them stem. I love it.
And Stacy, in the chat, someone asked if you could share resources on how to get a sensory profile. Just to add that in
I
for
will.
people to know.
I will
So we
definitely.
only have like 2 minutes left. And I think in that 2 minutes, I'll take just a little bit of time to share a personal story that might be helpful on this topic. Right now, my family is actually in the middle of moving to the house we just bought at the beginning of the month. And so I'm spending basically any time I'm not working or eating or sleeping, packing. And this is understandably difficult for my homeschooled 6-year-old with a lot of support needs and need for connection with me. And by the evenings every night, she's very dysregulated because she spent the whole day just by herself while I pack things and occasionally answer questions. And one of the ways that her dysregulation comes out is a high need for proprioceptive and vestibular input. And so she'll get to a point where she can't respond to verbal prompts, she can't answer questions. She just needs to get that input in. And her favorite game to play is actually to have me sit on the sofa with my knees like bent up to my chest. And she will stand on my knees and I'll hold my hands up and she'll lock her hands and lean her weight on my hands as she comes up and stands on my knees. And then she'll stand all the way up and then she'll like wobble down and catch my hands again. And she'll like have me open my legs out so that she lowers down and comes back up. And she loves that. And we'll do it for quite a while because it helps her regulate that proprioceptive and vestibular sense. And it gives her that one-to-one mom connection. So, you can really solve a lot of problems by addressing those sensory needs. And I know that, a typical family that didn't know about these things, my daughter would have a lot harder time than she does because, when a lot of us were kids, nobody even knew about any of this. They would just be like, oh, well, she's a bad person. She should go to her room and, have nobody hang out with her. But that's not the case. That's just what she needs. So thank you everybody for being here today. Thank you, Stacy. We will be back next week with Stacy again for our parenting challenges and parenting strategies webinar on the 2nd. So like last week we took a week off, but this week we're not. So we'll see you all guys back next week on Saturday.
All right. I'm excited. Thank you guys so much for coming to listen to me talk about my favorite stuff.
Stacy, will you be able to get me the presentation for next week sometime this week? I can send you the session description if you haven't finished it yet.
I will actually be working this weekend, so I will get all of that to you.
Okay, I'll send you the session description to it, just so you can kind of have a sense of what I build people to, and then you can go off from there. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody else who was here. Y'all are awesome.
You are welcome, everyone. Thanks for the thanks.